Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I do hope you're doing exceedingly well, and so much love to each and every one of you. And before we get started, don't forget to get that lovely hot beverage. I've got a hot cup of tea with me right now, so I hope you're going to do the same. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and lots of love to each and every one of you. So let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Lydia and I'm from the evergreen state known as Washington, which is situated in the Pacific Northwest and is bordered by British Columbia and Canada to the north, Idaho to the east, Oregon to the south, and the Pacific Ocean to the west. I'm from Tacoma, which is a city in Washington state on the banks of Puget Sound, south of Seattle. And I live here in a very attractive neighbourhood in East Side Enact, which has incredible views over Mount Rainier and exquisite local parks in the area, with the added advantage of being close to downtown with all the local shops and delicious eateries. I reside here in a green leafy neighbourhood in a very small charming sage green craftsman-style home with a dark brown roof, double-hung windows and a traditional covered porch. My story begins in 2016, when I was 22 years old at the time. That was when I decided to acquire a female lodger to help share some of the household expenses, which made sense to me from a financial perspective, as my house, although small and quaint, was rather on the large size for one person to manage all on their own. Before long, I found the quintessential perfect tenant and housemaid called Grace, who worked as an aspiring young nurse at a children's cancer hospital. I loved how unflappable she was, and from the moment I met her, she wore her heart on the sleeve and was a good-natured, cheery, convivial and passionate person. She possessed a soft Irish accent and told me once that working in the cancer ward with young patients had made her come to the realization of how precious life is and how we should value every moment that we have on the earth plane. I used to listen to the most remarkable stories that she would share with me of the courage and bravery that these young kids with cancer exhibited along their tumultuous, turbulent and challenging journey with this less than agreeable disease. It's almost like these plucky kids are teaching us about guts and fortitude, and not the other way round, she told me once. I also learnt that there were times when young children claimed to see angels and deceased family members when they were very close to death. Sometimes Grace would return home from a hard day's work at the children's hospital with a sombre, doleful look on her face, and I could discern tears clouding her pretty hazel eyes. I knew better than to ask her why she was so grievously sad, as I imagined those were the days when she'd lost a much-loved patient to that dreadful disease. Grace owned a very large, overweight, soppy and lackadaisical, pampered grey cat called Pepper. On her days off, she loved nothing better than to sit back on the couch, watching a lovely comedy on television, while stroking Pepper's long, silky coat. He would purr profusely and park his sizable body upon her lap, always falling into a deep sleep. I think for Grace, Pepper was a welcome distraction from the emotional trauma of a job that literally tugs at the heartstrings every day. Pepper was incredibly spoilt, like no cat I know, and would literally eat poached chicken every single day, along with tuna and kibbles. And I loved Pepper almost as much as she did, because he was a laid-back and carefree cat. One day Pepper went missing, and I tried my level best to reassure Grace that he could not have gone far. But losing her cat was very difficult for her, as she loved the bones of the critter, almost as if it was her own child. It was somewhat incomprehensible for the slothful Pepper to have vanished like this, as he was never inclined to wander far, and tended to hang around on the porch or in the living area, as it was his nature to be idle, lazy and languorous. Something terrible happened to him, said Grace. I just feel it in my guts. Look, I said, trying to offer words of comfort and reassurance. Maybe he went off on a little adventure of his own. I do know cats can disappear and reappear weeks later. You hear all kinds of stories about that. As far as I'm concerned, no news is good news, I assured her. I do hope you're right, said Grace. It's just not like Pepper to wander off far. A week later, on a sunny morning, Pepper appeared in the kitchen, rubbing his long coat against my legs and purring profusely, and although eager for some food, he acted as if he had never ever been away. I know most people would have sent an SMS or phoned Grace, but I'm not most people. I was champing at the bit to tell Grace the amazing news face to face and share in the utter joy that Pepper was now safe and sound and preening himself on the couch at home after tucking into a sizable portion of poached chicken. I had never been to Grace's place of work before, and I was not altogether prepared for what I would encounter. I eagerly parked my car in the parking lot under the shade of a large oak tree and ventured through the glass doors of this sterile, clinical and salubrious-looking hospital, and after receiving directions from a friendly lady in the reception area as to where I would find Grace, I diligently made my way to the cancer ward. As I went past, I briefly looked into one of the wards in passing, possibly more out of curiosity than anything else. A young bald-headed girl with a white skin and blue eyes was sitting up in her hospital bed, against a pile of puffed-up pillows, close to the door. She looked up at me with bright, warm, cheerful, friendly eyes, and for a moment our eyes locked. "Don't go," she called after me. "Please don't go. I really could do with a friend right now. It can get lonely in here at times." I took a few steps back and came into the girl's ward. The girl pointed to a chair beside her bed, and I obediently sat down. "Please don't look sorry for me," said the girl. "I hate it when I see the pity in people's eyes. I'm dying, I have brain cancer, and I've got 6 months to live, and I'm fine with that." "Really?" I said. "You're not frightened of dying?" The girl laughed. "Why do adults make such a big deal about death? You close your eyes and then you're out of here. What's so dreadful about that?" "You're very brave," I admitted. "I don't think in your shoes I'd be so strong, or feel like you do." "Well, it's a good job that I'm the one with cancer and not you," giggled the girl. "My name is Charlotte, by the way. What's yours?" "I'm Lydia," I said. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Charlotte. I've never ever met anyone with cancer before." "I'm no different than the next kid," said the girl. "I've just got cancer, that's all. Otherwise we're pretty much exactly the same. Nothing different, really." "How are your parents dealing with your diagnosis?" I asked hesitantly, already knowing the answer to that question. "It's awful," said Charlotte. "I hate it when they visit me, because I can see how broken up they are inside. They look at me with such piteous, defeated expressions on their face. I'm the one that has to comfort them. It's not the other way round." "Well," I said, "it's always the ones left behind that struggle with death the most. I imagine your parents are terrified of losing you. I know I would be in their shoes. I hate to imagine what they must be going through." "What's that?" I asked suddenly, looking at a teddy bear lying in Charlotte's arms, with the longest arms that I've ever seen before. "Boy, that's a funny-looking teddy bear," I said, if ever I saw one. "It's not a teddy bear," said Charlotte. "It's my Bigfoot." "Oh, Bigfoot," I laughed, not knowing quite what to say to that. I mean, who chooses Bigfoot over a teddy bear to cuddle? But this girl clearly did. "You're not a believer," chuckled Charlotte. "I can see the doubt in your eyes. Don't worry, most people are like you, highly cynical of all matters related to Bigfoot. My parents are the greatest scoffers of all. They really don't approve of my obsession with the critter." "Sorry," I confessed. "I really would like to believe. Believe me, I would. But I assure you, if such a critter was actually real, we would have more evidence by now, and tangible proof." "Oh, but they are real," said Charlotte. "When I was about 5 years old, a female Bigfoot would watch me playing in the backyard with my dolls. We live next door to the National Forest, you see. She was really lovely. I still remember her beautiful golden eyes. Sometimes when I lie back in my hospital bed, I visualize her and see her as clearly as I did when I was 5 years old." "You remember that?" I asked in amazement. "I can't remember anything when I was 5 years old. Are you sure it wasn't a bear or something you actually saw?" "Very sure," said the girl. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm certain I'm communicating with her at times. She speaks to me in my head in the hospital. She's so comforting and reassuring. She keeps telling me that death is no different than leaving one room behind and entering another." "That's an interesting perspective," I said, not really knowing what to say to that, as it sounded completely far-fetched to me. I mean, how could a Bigfoot speak to a young girl in a hospital bed? It was outrageously crazy. "I need to ask you a favour," said Charlotte, sitting up in the bed. Suddenly she looked excited. I want you to visit the national park at the back of my home, because the female Bigfoot has something she wants to give me. I think you're the right person to ask for the job." As you can imagine, when Charlotte asked me such a bizarre favour, I wasn't inclined to refuse her. I mean, who in their right mind says no to a young, dying cancer patient with only months left to live? I was certainly not going to decline her exuberant request. I remember leaving that hospital, wondering how on earth I was going to manage this farcical, outlandish favour without breaking the poor girl's heart in the process. Indeed, I was so concerned about this that I almost forgot to tell Grace the great news that Pepper had been found safe and well. "That's incredible," sighed Grace happily, giving me a huge hug. "It's so kind of you to come all this way just to tell me." "The naughty little scoundrel. I wonder what he's been up to. I can't wait to see him when I get back," she said. I must admit it was priceless to observe the joyous expression on Grace's attractive, heart-shaped face as she wiped tears of relief away from her hazel eyes. That evening I prepared spaghetti carbonara for dinner, while Grace was fussing over Pepper. "Where did you get to, boy?" she scolded him. "I thought we'd lost you for good." After I opened a bottle of wine for us to share during dinner, I confided in Grace about my curious dilemma. "Oh, you met Charlotte," she said. "She's a lovely, quirky character, isn't she?" "Yes, she is," I said. "I really like her, but she's asked me to go to the National Forest and wait for a female Bigfoot to hand me something to give to her." Grace laughed. "I told you she was quirky." "Well, what should I do?" I asked. "Humour her," said Grace. "I honestly don't see what else you can do. Telling her a white lie isn't a big deal if it's for the greater good. I'd tell her that you went to the forest and a female Bigfoot gave you a pine cone to give her. That will make her happy." "That's a great idea," I said, feeling heartily relieved. "You do know Charlotte rarely believes a female Bigfoot is actually speaking to her in her mind. She's convinced that at age 5 it would watch her playing in the backyard. She tells me she remembers it vividly." "Well, you know kids," laughed Grace. "They have fertile, inventive imaginations. She must have made the story up in her head, because Bigfoot is just a fictional character. We all know that." The following afternoon I visited Grace in the hospital, and she looked downcast. "You didn't go to the forest, did you?" she said, looking at me with a sullen, disappointed expression upon her face. "Oh, I did," I lied. "I saw the female Bigfoot, and she gave me this pine cone to give you." "Why are you lying?" said Grace, taking the pine cone from me and placing it on her bed. "I never thought you were a liar. You never went to the forest, did you? Mystic Mountain never saw you." "Who's Mystic Mountain?" I asked, looking perturbed. "The female Bigfoot that speaks to me in my head. I can't pronounce her real name, but her name means Mystic Mountain, which is what I call her." For a moment I didn't know what to say, as I felt like a kid that had been caught with my hand in the cookie jar. How did this young 11-year-old girl know that I was lying to her? Was I such a bad liar? "Why do adults think kids are so stupid?" sighed Charlotte. "Tell me, if you really saw Mystic Mountain, what did she look like?" she challenged me. "Well," I said, glancing over at the Bigfoot teddy bear, "it had very long arms, and was covered in reddish hair, and it was big." "You see, I told you," said Charlotte. "You didn't see Mystic Mountain. She doesn't have red hair." "All right," I confessed, "I lied, but I don't believe in Bigfoot, so I didn't see any point in going to that forest for you." "I never asked you to believe," said Charlotte. "I asked you to visit the forest. That's all you need to do for me. Is that so hard to do?" "I just don't want to disappoint you," I said. "I'd hate to do that." Charlotte reached out to touch my hand and squeezed it tightly. "You'll only disappoint me if you don't go," she said. So fast forward a week or so, and I was attired in walking clothes with a bottle of water, ready to embark on this crazy adventure just to humour a highly intelligent, perceptive girl in a cancer ward. I realised I couldn't fob her off with an avalanche of excuses, because this girl was as sharp and astute as a bald eagle. I just felt a desolate sadness in my heart that this little escapade was going to be entirely fruitless. I knew that Bigfoot was definitely no more real than Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. I must admit it was a beautiful sunny day, and I knew a little light exercise would do me a world of good. I was one of those people that always had good intentions and would try out a gym for a week or so, never to return again. It was crazy that I lived in Washington and barely ever went hiking. I was glad to see there was not many people around, as there was only one other car in the parking bay. I put on my sneakers and followed the long hiking trail into the woods, and I don't know what it was about these evergreen shaded retreats, but they're so uplifting, energizing and invigorating to the spirit. The arresting forest was full of western hemlocks, Douglas firs, Pacific yews and white-barked pines that towered up into the sky like regal skyscrapers, with moss literally hanging from tree branches like lush verdant curtains, and the dirt trail was surrounded by frilly, delicate leafy ferns, interesting-looking fungi, lily of the valley and wild ginger. I also marvelled at the way the light from the forest canopy filtered through the trees, basking the ground in a variegated, ethereal light. It was so enchanting and bewitching, much like a fairy tale. My thoughts were far away from my mission at hand, as I was so mesmerised by the resplendence of this idyllic oasis. Suddenly I heard a pretty whistle, which I imagined was a bird of some kind, and I started glancing up into the branches of a tree to look for the bird, but I saw nothing. The whistling stopped, and I proceeded along the path, when I suddenly got the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched, which instinctively put my nerves on edge and sent a creepy chill down my spine. I looked around, but nothing was there, but I did detect a very pleasant pine-like smell that seemed to come and go like a wafting, lingering perfume. The path veered up to the steep incline that was rocky and very picturesque, and I began to enjoy the sounds of the pretty bird song with the tweets and warbles that filled the air with pretty music. I encountered several ruffled grouse pecking away at the ground, and noted a couple of snowshoe hares hopping around the woodland area, seemingly unfazed by my presence, which was a surprise, as I was used to indigenous wildlife being rather skittish of me. I really got the sense that something or someone was trailing me, because I was certain I could hear heavy feet crunching leaf litter behind me, but when I stopped, so did they. I shrugged my shoulders and proceeded along my way, and then the whistling began all over again. I stopped dead in my tracks and scanned the branches of the tree. I was desperate to locate the mysterious bird that could whistle so perfectly, but once again I saw nothing. Suddenly I remembered my mission at hand, and why, of course, I was in the woods in the first place, and I recall thinking that in the very least I should bring something from the woods to appease Charlotte. At least it would prove that I had been here, and I had tried my level best to follow her bidding. I knew this time I was not going to lie to her, as Charlotte could see through me like a mirror. I began scanning the forest floor for pine cones to gather. I knew that at the very least I needed to bring Charlotte some evidence of my walk in the wood. That was when I instinctively got the sense that someone was watching me. I could see moss from about 8 feet off the ground being pulled away by these large dark hands, much like a curtain. I saw this leathery human-like face staring at me, and then the outlandish creature climbed through the brush and approached me cautiously on a pair of long, slender, powerful legs. She had overlong arms that she swung backwards and forwards as she moved. I was so shocked because this could not be real. It was not even remotely possible, surely not. I was staring at a female Bigfoot. I froze to the spot, so overwhelmed by consternation, so much so that I think my fear was momentarily suppressed. Imagine for a moment that you suddenly encounter something you never believe existed. It has a profound effect of shattering your reality like a mirror into thousands of little glassy shards and making you question everything you thought you knew. It also makes you hauntingly aware how little you do actually know, and that the world is not quite as you perceived it to be. I stood still, not moving a muscle. Was this an illusion, I wondered, or a crazy dream that I was about to wake up from? The female Bigfoot stood there very still, almost as if she appreciated and even sensed my wondrous awe and my amazement. I think my eyes must have been as round as saucers, and my mouth hanging to the ground agog. Not for a moment did any feelings of fear overtake me in a way that they should have done, because this Bigfoot was so intimidating, formidable, powerful, strong, and majestic, and if she had wanted to wring my neck, she could have snapped it like a chicken, as such was her power and strength. I could see the critter was exceedingly tall. I think she was well over 8 foot, and possibly 700 pounds, and 4 feet across the shoulders, and she was covered in light brown hair, which was more sparse under her arms, around her breasts and on her knees, and she had very little hair upon her face. I did discern that the leathery weathered skin on her face was the golden colour of untanned leather. I also noted her deep-set, intelligent eyes were also golden. She had a large flat nose, a furrowed brow ridge, and thin lips. I was so overwhelmed and transfixed by her Goliath size, which was quite frankly mind-boggling, and this was intensified by the appearance of dense muscle mass that highlighted her substantial girth. I perceived that she possessed the largest shoulders that I've ever seen, and a pyramid-shaped head that just merged into the shoulders, seamlessly without any neck to speak of. I could tell the reticent, shy, rather evasive critter was exceedingly outside her comfort zone, and seemed hesitant as she approached me. That was when I realized that she was handing me something in her large hands. I reached out to receive it, and then the critter just turned around and glided away, moving in a way that was so fluid she looked like she was floating, and she was as fast and as graceful as a cheetah, and I marvelled at what I had beheld. I stood there, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. I immediately began to examine the stone that she'd given me. It just looked like a speckled ordinary river stone, but I knew that whatever it was, Charlotte wanted it. I remember returning to my car and sitting in the front seat for a very long time, until someone finally tapped my window, which I wound down. "Are you all right, ma'am? You've been parked here for a very long time in your car. Is your car running all right? Or would you like some help?" I looked at my watch, appalled, realizing I'd been staring into space for 3 long hours. "I'm fine," I said, starting up the engine and driving away. Looking back, I must have been so bedazzled and beguiled by what I'd seen. I possibly sat in my car in a trance-like state, trying to absorb it all. I just think I couldn't grasp the shocked revelation that Bigfoot was indeed real. I realized that maybe Charlotte had really connected to this creature. How on earth could she communicate with it all the way in her hospital bed? It made no sense to me at all. Did Bigfoot have outer-worldly abilities, I wondered? It seemed likely that this must be the case. The next morning, as I approached Charlotte's bed, I could see a jubilant sparkle in her eyes. "You saw Mystic Mountain," she said, "didn't you? I told you she was real, but you didn't believe me, did you?" "I don't understand any of it, Charlotte. None of this makes sense to me. But yes, I think I saw her." "The trouble with adults is they complicate everything," said Charlotte. "Did you bring me the stone she gave you?" "How do you know it's a stone?" I asked, looking at Charlotte in astonishment. "Mystic Mountain told me it's a stone Bigfoots keep close to them when they die. It helps with the transition process, you see, or the crossing over. It makes it easier." "This is all beyond me," I said. "I don't understand any of it. None of it makes any sense to me at all. I think I just preferred the world when I thought I knew everything." "You don't have to understand," said Charlotte, laughing. "You just have to trust and believe. That's all. It's called faith." In the weeks and months that followed, I visited Charlotte 3 times a week, and she really warmed the cockles of my heart. I couldn't make any sense of my Bigfoot encounter or Charlotte being able to connect with the critter in such a profound telepathic way that bordered on the incredulous, but I knew better than to doubt her story, for I had seen the Bigfoot myself, and now I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Bigfoot was real. I remember Charlotte began to deteriorate rapidly during the final weeks of her life, and became painfully thin and emaciated, and her skin began to look as white and fragile as paper. I knew she was in terrible pain, and it was very difficult to watch her suffer like this, although they did increase the morphine. I would still visit her and read her books by the bedside. One day she awoke to what I can only describe was a golden hour, and she began to talk and talk like old times. For a moment I thought she had experienced a miraculous recovery, but the nurse just nudged me and said, "Enjoy the time you have left with her. It won't be long now." "But she's so much better," I protested. The nurse repeated, "Go and spend some time with her. She hasn't got much time left." I had no idea where her parents were, but I heard that her mother had an emotional breakdown on the way to the hospital. "I'm going today," Charlotte informed me, in such a nonchalant way, as if she was talking about the weather. "Mystic Mountain told me that I'm going today." I held Charlotte's hand. "I don't want you to go," I said, the tears filling my eyes. "I really don't. I've grown so attached to you." Charlotte gave me her Bigfoot teddy bear and the black stone. "I want you to keep them," she said. "You have been like a best friend to me. I will always love you, like I love Mystic Mountain." "I will treasure them," I said, wiping away tears. and I will also miss you. I won't be far from you, and if I can visit you, I will. And that's a promise, she said, giving me a gentle squeeze. How will I know it's you? I asked. I'll come to you as a robin, she said. I've always liked robins. If you see a robin behaving strangely, that will be me. Later that day, Charlotte died, and I was totally and utterly devastated. But I did find the Bigfoot bear and the black stone brought me a measure of comfort, and I put them in pride of place on my mantle, and for weeks I had to avoid looking at them, as it was all I could do to break down into tears and sob. But now when I look at them, I am able to smile. When Grace saw that Charlotte had given me her Bigfoot teddy bear, she was utterly astonished. She must have loved you a lot to give you that, she said. I know how attached and possessive she was over that bear. One day as Charlotte and I were in the kitchen, we saw a robin sitting on a tree branch staring in at us in the kitchen. It seemed so tame and was not in the least bit skittish, and it stayed on that branch for 10 long minutes, just looking in at us. It was utterly extraordinary. I could hardly believe it. I've never seen a robin behave like that, said Grace. How strange. I never said anything to Grace, but I knew that the robin was from Charlotte. It's been over a couple of years since Charlotte died, and I miss her terribly. I still don't understand how I got to encounter a Bigfoot in this curious, bizarre, outlandish way, but I'm in no doubt what I saw. I want to assure you that I've never shared this story with anyone, not even Grace, but I assure you every word of it is true, as astonishing and as far-fetched as it sounds. So there you are. That's my story. Do you know that is the most gorgeous story? I just loved it. It really brought tears to my eyes. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Until next time, goodbye and good night.